and depression. Spirituality, researchers are founding, helps recovery from depression. And depression is lower among those with what's known as an intrinsic religiosity. And what we're talking about here is people who have a deep commitment to and a belief in God. They're not just going to church to go to church, or going to Sabbath or Sunday school, or just engaging in the activities just religiously, but they also have a deep relationship and commitment to God. Depression is lower amongst those than those who are just engaging in the religious activities. So it's more than just being religious, it's also having a deep commitment with God that helps with depression. Let's look at some lessons from the Bible. I'd like to look at Elijah because Elijah suffered from some depression. This is a lesson of faith from Elijah. Elijah went up to the top of Carmel, and he cast himself down upon the earth and said to his servant, "Go up now, look toward the sea." And he went up and looked and said, "There is nothing." And he said, "Go again 7 times. And it came to pass at the 7th time that he said, "Behold, there ariseth a little cloud out of the sea like a man's hand." And he said, "Go up, say unto Ahab, prepare thy chariot, and get thee down, that the rain stop thee not." And it came to pass in the meanwhile that the heaven was black with clouds and wind, and there was great rain. This is found in 1 Kings 18. This happened right after Elijah had that experience on Mount Carmel, for those of you who are Bible students. Let's see what someone says about this. When upon Mount Carmel, he, Elijah, offered the prayer for rain. His faith was tested, but he persevered in making known his request unto God. 6 times he prayed earnestly, and yet there was no sign that his petition was granted. But with a strong faith, he urged his plea to the throne of grace. Had he given up in discouragement at the 6th time, some of us give up too quickly, his prayer would not have been answered, but he persevered until the answer came. God does not always answer our prayers the first times we call upon him. Some of us are dealing with depression, dealing with difficulties, and we're wondering, "God, why don't you deal with this situation so I can feel better?" But she tells us here, for should he do this, we might take it for granted that we had a right to all the blessings and favors he bestowed upon us. Instead of searching our heart to see if any evil was entertained in us, and it doesn't say this here, but in another part she says that Elijah was really searching his heart and saying, "Is there anything in my heart that will prevent you from hearing my prayer, Lord?" Instead of doing that, any sin indulged, we would become careless and fail to realize our dependence upon him and our need for his help. So I'm saying this in terms of depression. Faith is going to be tested sometimes for those of you dealing with depression, but we have to be persistent. And if God is not answering your prayer right away, there's a reason. Trusting in divine power is what we're talking about. We have to trust. And when he saw that, now this is the other side of Elijah, he arose and ran for his life. This is the same man who had all that faith. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree. And he requested for himself that he might die and said, "It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers." This same man who had all this faith, this lets me know that the same thing can happen to us. That sometimes we can have so much faith, another time we can just allow the enemy to discourage us. And she says, however courageous and successful a man may be, unless he looks constantly to God when circumstances arise to test his faith, he will do what? Lose his courage. So as you're dealing with depression, if you're listening right now and dealing with depression, there are going to be times when you may feel courageous and other times you may feel down. But my admonition to you is to always keep in mind that God is with you, no matter what you're going through. And if you exercise that faith in him and you're persistent with it, he will see you through. What we think also has a lot to do with our faith and what happens in depression. The Bible tells us, "For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he." And many times psychologists have found this out in the last 10, 15 years. People who are depressed, they think so negatively about the world, about themselves and others. And we have to help them change their patterns of thoughts. And this is something we can keep in mind. Now, we may go into a cellar and stay there and look around in its dark corners, and we can talk of the darkness and say, "Oh, it is dark, so dark here," and keep talking about it. But will it make it any lighter? Oh, no. What are we going to do? Come out of it. Come out of the dark into the upper chamber where the light of God's countenance shines brightly. We have to change our perspective. Some of us are quick to pick up the negative. I have to be honest. I'm one of those. I pick up the negative very quickly. And so this is something I have to work on continually to start to see what good can come from this. And if you're dealing with depression, that's something you really need to ask God help with. And the Bible tells us, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. This is just one of many verses in the Bible that tells us that what we think can have an impact on our depression, can have an impact on our faith and our trust in God. The other thing in dealing with depression or any kind of difficulties, we have to recognize that God sometimes allows this. Because in Hebrews, the Apostle Paul tells us, for whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. Now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous but grievous. Nevertheless afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. Hebrews 12, 6 and 11. We have to recognize that there are times when things are allowed because of the fact that God is trying to do something in our lives. People often cringe at the thought of God using pain and difficult trials for spiritual growth. God sometimes uses the most difficult times in our lives and sometimes the most grueling pain to teach us, purify us, and use us for His glory. So I'm saying all of this to you who may be dealing with depression, or also someone who may be dealing with depression. Difficulties may come sometimes, but God sometimes uses that to help us grow. So if you're dealing with that, keep that in mind as you go through this process. And then the Bible gives us some important things. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Who strengtheneth me? For with God, nothing shall be impossible. These are just things that we can learn to help us with our depression. And the Bible also tells us, fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. I just picked out some verses that can be encouraging for us. And finally, I want to share this with you. You have to talk faith. You have to live faith. You have to act faith, that you may have an increase in faith. So my prayer is that you may recognize how important trusting in God is for healing of depression and any other difficulties that you're facing. All of these things, if you put them into practice, better nutrition, exercise, water, sunshine, temperance, being more self-controlling, air, rest, and finally trust in divine power. If you're dealing with depression and you're able to get someone or on your own work through these steps, you will see that it will be more helpful than drugs or talk therapy. And then I will say even boldly, in some cases, you can even cure your depression. So my prayer is that this has been helpful to you and that you will use some of these remedies for dealing with depression. We have available resources, too, at our website, www.beinggoodhealth.com. Just wanted to share that with you. God bless you, and we pray that this has been a blessing to you.